Hey, mate, come closer to the fire, pour yourself a glass of cold ale. All right, let's open up and start the story. It's about the Berserkers, fierce Viking warriors. They fought in a trance.
The scent of damp earth, salty surf, and rye bread burning over the fire. This was what Midgard breathed in the 9th century. Inside the great longhouse of King Harald, built of massive oak logs and roofed with turf, a tense silence hung in the air. There were no golden thrones or crystal goblets here like those of the Frankish kings. The Vikings valued other things: sturdy wood, reliable weapons, and loyalty to one's word. Along the walls on long benches sat men whose faces were scarred by iron and weathered by northern winds. Yet even among these hardened warriors, one distinct caste was regarded with awe and dread. These were the Ulfhednar and the Berserkers. In the corner near the hearth, where the women of the house poured sour ale into clay pitchers, sat Torstein. Resting on his shoulders was the heavy, coarse pelt of a massive brown bear that he had killed with his own hands in the forests of Varmland, armed with nothing but a short knife. In Norse society, where women held the keys to all the chests and could divorce a husband if he proved to be a coward or a poor provider, a man had to earn a woman's respect. They looked at Torstein with reverence, but also with deep apprehension. Beneath the pelt, his body hid tattoos of runic staves dedicated to Odin, the god of war, poetry, and magic. The Berserkers were not mere mercenaries. They were a religious brotherhood, priests of battle who surrendered their minds to the All-Father in exchange for superhuman strength. At the very same time, while the embers smoldered in Midgard, high up in Asgard, within the hall of Valhalla, Odin looked out upon the world through his single eye that saw every secret. His two ravens, Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory, had just returned from their long flights and sat upon his shoulders, whispering into his ear of approaching blood. Nearby, leaning against a carved pillar, stood Loki. His face constantly shifted expressions, from feigned submission to a sly smirk. Loki hated Odin's Berserkers. He considered them crude instruments, devoid of the refinement he so loved in his own intrigues. "Look at them, All-Father," Loki hissed, pointing a long, slender finger down at Harald's longhouse. "Your beloved bears sleep by the fire like fat hounds. King Harald believes that with this handful of savages, he will conquer all the southern fjords and win Norway without so much as mentioning your name in his prayers. They think their fury is their own doing. They have forgotten to whom their breath belongs in the heat of battle." Odin did not move. His hand, clad in a leather glove, firmly gripped the shaft of the spear Gungnir, a weapon that never missed its mark. Every word from Loki was poison, but Odin knew. Poison either kills the weak or makes the strong even tougher. A berserker's fury is not a fire in a stove that can be doused with water, Loki, the All-Father replied slowly, his voice echoing like stones tumbling down a mountain. "It is a storm that I myself placed within their chests. You see only savagery in it because your mind is accustomed to detours and deceit. But when iron meets iron, only pure will survives." "Pure will?" Loki laughed, a sound like the rustling of dry grass. "Give me 3 days, Odin. Let me go down to them. I will prove to you that their madness is not your gift, but merely a sickness of the mind that can easily be turned against themselves. If they stand against my game, I will acknowledge their sanctity. If not, their souls will go not to your halls, but to the dismal chambers of Helheim." Odin nodded. Loki's intrigues were always dangerous, but it was through them that the true essence of men and gods was revealed. The gods of Asgard did not shield mortals from hardships. They watched how mortals overcame them. The next morning, a thick gray fog rolled over the coast. hiding the outlines of the longships moored near the shore. Vikings from all around the district were gathering for the Althing, a popular assembly held out in the open air, usually on a sacred hill surrounded by hallowed stones. Hollywood myths often paint the Norsemen as savages who knew no law, but this is a major misconception. They had a strict, developed legal system. Every free bondi, a landowner, had the right to vote. Here, land boundary disputes were settled, war guilds, fines for killing were paid, and sentences were passed on criminals. The most terrible punishment was declaring a man a varg, a wolf in the forest, an outlaw whom anyone could kill without trial, and whom no one had the right to shelter or feed. Among the crowd of bondis appeared a strange man. He wore a long gray cloak with a hood pulled low over his eyes, and in his hands he held a staff carved with serpents. It was Loki. He did not speak openly, as the law of the Althing forbade outsiders without kinship from participating in councils. Instead, he approached Guttorm, an old, wealthy bondi who held great influence among the locals and secretly hated King Harald for his high taxes. "You look at these berserkers and see protectors, Guttorm," Loki whispered, approaching from behind. His voice sounded as if it were the old man's own thoughts. "But look closer at them. They are not human. They drink the blood of sacrificed horses. They whisper to night spirits. When Harald conquers the neighboring lands, he will no longer need neighbors like you. His bears will come into your home, take your grain, your livestock, and your daughters. They answer only to the wolf, not to the law of the Althing." Guttorm frowned. The seed of doubt fell upon the fertile soil of his fears. Meanwhile, Loki acted with more than just words. In the evening, when the Berserkers gathered in a separate earth house to prepare for the ritual consumption of food before the upcoming campaign, Loki stealthily slipped into their provisions. Into the large cauldron where the fatty meat of a wild boar was boiling, he poured a powder prepared from henbane, blackroot, and a magical potion grown in the mists of Niflheim. The ordinary henbane and mushrooms that warriors sometimes used to enter a trance induced only a controlled fury, but Loki's magic was meant to completely erase the line between enemy and brother. It was meant to turn them into rabid beasts that could not tell light from darkness. When Torstein and his brothers in arms ate the meat and drank the ritual mead, the poison began to take effect. Usually, the state of Berserker gang brought wild strength, but the warrior remained a weapon in the king's hands. This time, however, everything went wrong. Torstein felt a fluid flame, not just blood, boil in his veins. The walls of the earth house felt like a cage. He began to breathe heavily, foam coming from his mouth, and his fingers convulsively gripped the haft of his battle axe. He rushed outside, just as the assembly of the Althing was drawing to a close. His eyes were completely black, devoid of pupils. Before him, he saw not people, but bloody shadows. Loki, watching from afar, smirked. Torstein swung his axe at his own brother-in-arms, the young warrior Hakon. If a brother's blood were spilled on the sacred ground of the Althing, the entire brotherhood of berserkers would be cursed, declared outlaws, and King Harald's cause would crumble to dust. The strict law of the Vikings did not forgive sacrilege at the assembly. But Asgard is home to more than just Loki's intrigues. Where malice tries to break a fair fight, the one who settles disputes with a heavy hammer always appears. Thor, the god of thunder and protector of Midgard, had been watching the schemes of his foster brother. He did not care for long talks and clever plans. His truth was iron and pure thunder. Just as Torstein's axe was raised above the head of the unarmed Hakon, who looked with horror at his maddened commander, the sky above the fjord suddenly tore in half. This was no ordinary summer rain. The clouds instantly turned pitch black, and the air became so charged with electricity that the hair on the Vikings' heads stood on end. Thor struck his hammer Mjolnir against the anvil of the heavens. A bolt of blindingly white lightning struck the earth directly between Torstein and Hakon, ripping up the turf and sending up a fountain of sparks and stones. The shockwave was so powerful that the Berserker was thrown back several paces. Thor's magical thunder possessed a special power. It burned away any sorcery. Loki's black poison, which had clouded Torstein's mind, instantly burned out of his veins, leaving only the pure, crystal-clear fury of Odin, a fury that does not blind, but instead makes every sense sharp as a razor's edge. And at that very moment, while the echo of the thunder was still rolling through the mountains, the prows of enemy ships emerged from the fog of the fjord. It was the fleet of Jarl Sven, an old enemy of King Harald, whom Loki had secretly egged on to attack by assuring him that the Berserkers would be occupied with infighting. 10 great longships, each carrying 60 warriors armed to the teeth, were rapidly approaching the shore. They hoped to catch the confused and frightened locals by surprise. "Enemies!" rang out the cry of a watchman from the lookout tower. But instead of panic, they saw something far more terrifying. Torstein rose from the ground. His bare pelt was scorched by lightning. Blood flowed from the wounds on his arms that he had inflicted on himself in his fit of madness, but there was no longer chaos in his eyes. A cold, calculating flame of war burned there. He cast aside his damaged shield and heavy chainmail. A true berserker needed no protection of iron. He was protected by the belief that the day of his death was already written by the Norns, the goddesses of destiny, and nothing could alter that verdict. 50 of Harald's berserkers lined up in a single row on the sandy shore, right where the waves broke against the stones. They began to emit a low, guttural roar, like a pack of wolves before a hunt. Many of them began to bite the edges of their wooden shields, not out of madness, but to spike their adrenaline to the limit, a point where the body ceases to feel pain and fatigue. The enemy warriors of Jarl Sven, who were already leaping from the sides of their ships into the icy water of the fjord, froze in their tracks. They expected to see peasants and terrified bondies, but instead met a wall of half-naked giants whose bodies were covered in war paint and scars, and who looked at them not with fear, but with hungry joy. The berserkers charged forward. They did not maintain a shield wall formation like ordinary infantrymen. They moved as a battering ram. Torstein was the first to crash into the enemy ranks. His two-handed axe traced deadly circles, cleaving iron helmets and Frankish swords in two. Odin gave his warriors a gift, a mighty strength where their skin became tougher than armor due to maximum concentration and speed of movement. Enemies hacked at Torstein's chest, but the blades merely glanced off his muscles, leaving superficial scratches because the adrenaline and trance made his movements elusive and his muscles hard as oak. It was a bloodbath on the shore, where every wave of the surf turned red. The battle did not last long, but its ferocity could match the battle at the end of the world, Ragnarok. The 50 berserkers completely annihilated Jarl Sven's vanguard, which numbered over 300 warriors. Those who remained alive on the ships frantically leaned on their oars, trying to pull back out into the open sea, far away from this cursed shore where men fought like gods. When the last enemy fell onto the wet sand, Torstein stopped. His breathing was heavy, plumes of steam rising from his mouth in the cold air. The warrior's body was covered in the blood of his enemies and his own, with red fluid welling from several deep wounds on his thigh and shoulder. A process began which the sagas called the Berserker crash, a terrible fatigue that sets in after the trance ends. At that moment, a berserker becomes as helpless as an infant, his muscles trembling, and his mind demanding a long sleep. Yet Torstein stayed on his feet, leaning on the haft of his axe. The local bondies, who only an hour ago had listened to Loki's poisonous speeches, now looked at these 50 men with awe. They realized that without the Berserkers, their homes would be burning right now, and their children dragged off as slaves to the markets of the East. Old Guttorm approached Torstein and silently handed him his own silver arm ring, a token of the highest respect and an acknowledgement of his guilt. In the evening sky, as Thor's clouds parted, a brilliant green and red aurora borealis flared up. The Vikings knew this was no ordinary light. It was the gleam of the armor of the Valkyries, Odin's shield-maiden warriors who carry the souls of those who fell with weapons in hand to Valhalla. 3 Berserkers had died in this fight, but smiles were fixed on their faces. They knew that tonight they would dine at the same table as the All-Father, drinking mead from horns and listening to the songs of the best skalds of the past. Loki, whose plan had completely failed, returned to Asgard in shame. His intrigue had not only failed to destroy the Berserkers, but on the contrary, it had cleansed them of doubt and solidified their glory in Midgard. Odin met him with a silent gaze from his single eye, in which lay a deep, age-old wisdom. The gods triumphed, mankind stood firm, and law and loyalty once again proved stronger than any deceit. Inside King Harold's longhouse, a great fire burned once more. The women healers washed the warriors' wounds with strong beer, rubbed them with salves of yarrow and resin, and bound them with clean linen. The skalds took up their instruments, and a new song soared over the fjord, a song of how Odin's bears tore apart the nets of deceit and defended their land to the thunderous roar of Thor's hammer.
Goodbye, mate. See you at the next bonfire with another incredible story.